Howdy my totally as always Tubular gamers. We're back with another video. Let's get to it. So today I'm coming at you with a video about the Capcom Fighting Collection 2. I'm so excited to talk about this collection. I can't believe it's even real. And not only is it real, it's coming out very soon. And I've had the pleasure of playing it these last few days thanks to Capcom. So major thank you and shout out to Capcom. Really do appreciate it. That is very cool indeed. I've made it no secret on my channel that I absolutely love fighting games, especially older fighting games. A few years back now I ranked every single Capcom fighting game. Yes, all of them, in what is my longest ranking video to date. So yeah, I know a thing or two about Capcom fighting games. And this collection got me particularly excited because it features a bunch of just forgotten Capcom games that desperately need some kind of modern re-release. A lot of these games have never been re-released before, and if they have, it was so long ago. Yeah, they need another re-release on something preferably modern. We don't want these games to be absolutely lost to time or just fall into obscurity, and thanks to incredible collections like these games won't. So for the unfamiliar, what games are included in this collection? Well, this collection includes Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000 Pro, Capcom vs SNK 2 Mark of the Millennium 2001, Capcom Fighting Evolution, Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper, Power Stone 1 and 2, Project Justice, and Plasma Sword Knight of Bilstein. And so I was trying to think of how I should cover this collection. I could do just like a basic overview, but I thought it would be more of the totally tubular style to rank all of the games in the collection from worst to best, giving each one of these games a little review, sharing my thoughts, feelings on them, and seeing how they've aged all these years later. It seemed like the Jonathan way to go about this. But before we begin, I do want to say, regardless of these games' qualities, this is an excellent collection. I've spent several hours with it, and I can tell you that not only is it great that these games are available in the modern day, but these are easily the definitive ways to play these games. You can switch between the American and Japanese versions. There's a bunch of display and filter options. I'm pretty sure you can get just about any joystick or pad to work with them. You can play all of these games online. Yeah, all of them go online now. There's a bunch of extra features in the museum that are pretty cool, especially if you've ever been curious about these games. They play better than ever now. And so with that, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so very much. And this collection's got so much variety that I think there's a little something for every type of fighting game fan. While it might not be as incredible or crazy as the Marvel vs. Capcom fighting collection, this is still a great collection that should be part of any fighting game aficionado's library. And so let's get to the ranking. What is the weakest game in this collection? It should be fairly obvious. Easily the weakest game in the collection, we have Capcom Fighting Evolution. Honestly, I'm just kind of scratching my head as to why they even included this game in this collection to begin with. There are so many better other Capcom fighting games that could have taken this game's spot, but instead we unfortunately have really one of the worst games Capcom has ever made. Capcom has put out a hell of a lot of fighting games, but it doesn't really get much worse than Capcom Fighting Evolution. Even when this game was released, it was panned by pretty much everybody for being just hastily thrown together and being, quite frankly, just kind of lazy. So Fighting Evolution takes characters from Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Third Strike, Darkstalkers, and Red Earth of all things. But this game doesn't take all of these cool characters and put them together in an interesting mashup in any way. When I say that it takes characters from these games, I mean it literally just copies and pastes characters and mechanics from those games. They're just kind of slapped together with no cohesion, consistent art style, or even consistent mechanics. And so what it leads to is just this really sloppy, cobbled together mess. And all these years later, yeah, the game still isn't very good. It's still incredibly incoherent. Visually, it's just ugly. Some characters look significantly better than others. Some characters have completely different animation styles and move at a different frame rate from others. They don't feel similar whatsoever, and I don't mean in a way where all the characters feel unique. No, it feels like you're playing several different games when it comes to these characters. It just kind of feels like Mugen, where it's just all here and they didn't try to make anything consistent. For instance, there is a newcomer, Ingrid, and she looks significantly better than all of the other characters since she actually has new animations, a new sprite, etc. what this game ultimately is just this Frankenstein's monster that doesn't have any real flow to it. It doesn't play nice, it doesn't feel nice, and it certainly doesn't look nice either. The roster of characters doesn't even make any sense. How are you missing Ken, Sagat, and Morgan? Yeah, they have Darkstalkers in here, but they don't have the main character. And with all these different mechanics and characters grabbed from other games, I can't imagine the game is all that balanced either. Look, when I was playing this, I really wanted to play any other game in the Capcom Fighting Collection too, but I thought I would sit down and give this game a real shot, and yeah, it still sucks. There's just no way to really redeem this one, unfortunately. But hey, I guess if you're looking for the definitive way to play this pile of crap, here it is. Well, don't worry, things are much better going forward, starting with this game, Plasma Sword Nightmare of Bilstein. In the intro, I talked about how there was a bunch of older, forgotten Capcom fighting games, and this is a prime example of that. This game has just been completely forgotten about, but I'm so glad that it's finally available on a modern console because it's actually pretty cool. Sure, it's not the best 3D fighting game you'll play from the 90s, and it's clearly inspired by Soul Calibur to a certain extent, but it's actually still quite fun. So this game is actually a sequel to the first Plasma Sword that is not on this collection or the prior collection, so yeah, we just get Plasma Sword 2 here. Bilstein is back, he's causing havoc or whatever. That's pretty much all the story we're getting with this one. I always thought the world and characters of Plasma Sword were pretty cool. They look really strange. Like, to this day, this game has some of the ugliest characters I've ever seen in a fighting game, but I always loved just how weird and out there it is. It also is clearly inspired by Star Wars, but let me clarify, old Star Wars, you know, when it was still cool. But all these years later, you can still see this game's personality just busting through. There's so many weird things, so many characters moonwalk and have strange animations, and I just love the game's aesthetic. The music ain't half bad either. But you know, when it actually comes to the fighting and, you know, the fighting game, I think it's pretty decent. I'm not going to act like this is the most complex, nuanced, or in-depth fighting. There isn't a ton of strings or combos to do. Everything is pretty basic and the game can feel rather button mashy. And if you want to compare this game to a fellow 3D weapons-based fighter, you know, Soul Calibur, you're not going to be doing this game any favors. Soul Calibur just kind of blows this game out of the water in pretty much every aspect, but I think you can still find a few hours of fun. The super moves go crazy in this game and further add to the game's charm. While there is a decent number of characters, they really struggle to feel all that different from each other. Like, a few characters feel very different from each other. Bilstein plays pretty different from just about everybody else, but a lot of the characters really feel similar and have similar inputs and moves. Despite all that, I still did have a little bit of fun coming back to this one, and I think this game is a total hidden gem all these years later. I always felt like Star Gladiator had the potential to really become a series from Capcom, but unfortunately it just never really panned out. At the very least, we got this fun game, and maybe Hayato can show up in another game again. That would be cool at least. And so here we have Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000. So this was actually the second time that Capcom and SNK characters met up, but this was the first time they fought each other in a fighting game. Now, it doesn't take a data scientist to realize that Capcom fighting SNK characters is just a match made in heaven. Throughout the 90s, really the two main fighting game companies were Capcom and SNK. They were the absolute kings in that sense, and so having them come together for a crossover, yeah, that's an incredible prospect, and while this game doesn't quite live up to the potential and it's not one of my very favorite Capcom crossover games, I still think it is a pretty decent fighting game even nowadays. Something I've always really liked about this game though was the game's aesthetic, soundtrack, and just general vibe. It has such a Y2K vibe, and maybe it's just my nostalgia speaking, but I just always really digged this game's tone. I think it's really cool, I like the weird AI voice, and it feels unique from all of Capcom's other crossover games. So in a game like this, arguably the most important aspect is the roster. When it comes to this game's roster, I think it's just alright. On the Capcom side, it really is just Street Fighter and Morgan, and then on the SNK side, it's really just King of Fighters and a character or two thrown in there from Art of Fighting and Fatal Fury. I think the roster's fine, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more variety from both sides. But at the end of the day, we know who the core audience for a game like this is. It's going to be people who play King of Fighters and Street Fighter, so it makes sense why they would mostly choose characters from those series. I can at the very least applaud them for trying to create a cohesive art style, and outside of Morgan, everyone looks pretty nice and unified here. And a bunch of classic music from both companies show up, so that's certainly a win. When it comes to the fighting, it actually plays a bit more like SNK fighters, with less buttons overall, but if you've ever played as any of these characters from either company, I think you're going to be just fine here. I will say though, when it comes to the overall feel and flow of these matches, it definitely feels more SNK. It feels stiffer like an SNK game, and plenty of these characters still have some crazy ass inputs. You can still pick up and play this game casually and have fun, but I feel like it's going to be a little harder to get into this one than say Marvel vs. Capcom. But all in all, I still think it feels nice. Something that makes Capcom vs. SNK 1 especially interesting is the way the ratio system works. So in this game you get 4 ratio points, and after you select a character you can assign how many ratio points you want to them, but you can't go past 4. But what you can do is then assign yourself multiple characters and give them low ratio. For instance, you can have 4 ratio 1 characters, you could have 2 ratio 2 characters, a ratio 3 character, and a ratio 1 character, or you can just go in with 1 ratio 4 character. And this really allows you to actually create some strategy. Like if you're really good with someone, maybe you want to make them ratio 2 or 3, and if you're just alright with someone, make them ratio 1. Or you can just have an entire team of 4 all at ratio 1. While I think this system is interesting, I think it's handled way better in Capcom vs. SNK 2, and if you're playing in single player, it's really lame because they determine every character's ratio level for you, and so you won't be able to have these crazy different teams just due to how the characters are set up. Thankfully, the game's way better in multiplayer anyway. This does add a little bit to the depth though, and it sometimes will have you choosing characters that you may not have chosen before. There's also the 2 grooves, which are essentially, do you want it to feel more like a Capcom fighter or an SNK fighter? Either way, it's gonna lean a bit more on the SNK side. Overall, I think that this is a decent fighter. There's actually a bit of depth here, but I can't sit here and act like this game is spectacular, one of the best Capcom crossover games. There's clearly a lot of potential with this, and they were just getting their feet wet, they were trying things out, and I think they really had a lot more success with the second game, but this first one, yeah, it's still alright. And so here we have Project Justice, another long forgotten 3D Capcom fighter, and it's actually the sequel to Rival Schools. Rival Schools is not in this collection or the prior one. Maybe in the future it'll one day get re-released, but hey, we got Project Justice here, which I always thought was better anyway. I would say that out of all the games in this collection, this might be the most underrated one of them all. It's actually a very competent 3D fighter, and it still feels really nice even nowadays. There is a little bit of a story here, and it actually does continue from the prior game. It sees our students older and just trying to get through school when yeah, shit happens. Something about this game that has always stuck out to me is just the aesthetic, the characters, and the world. It still is really unique all these years later. All of the characters are students. All of their fighting styles and movesets are based off of their own interests in school. And while some of these are really spot on, like the volleyball girl who does volleyball maneuvers as attacks, I think it gives this game some personality, it helps it stand out, and it gives it that juice that it really needed. And when it comes to the characters, pretty much everybody from the prior game is here except Sakura. Yeah, the one character from Street Fighter, the one character from another Capcom game is gone. I guess they really wanted this series to stand on its own. And they do introduce a number of new characters to this game, and I think most of them are pretty cool. They're all at least visually very different from each other. Speaking of visuals, I think this is a great looking game. I love this game's aesthetic, the animations are really smooth, and it's just a nice looking game from 2000. But when it comes to that core moment-to-moment gameplay, how is it? I think it's actually pretty good. It feels really smooth, the characters flow incredibly nice, the battles flow nice, it's easy to pick up and play, there still is a decent amount of depth and strategy here. I think it strikes a pretty nice balance between casual and hardcore. I've heard some people call this just 3D Marvel vs. Capcom. That's not totally far from the truth, but I think it's complex enough to not just be a total button masher. Something really cool about Rival Schools and Project Justice is that they're actually team-based fighters, but you can't switch between all your team members in a fight. After each round though, you can change characters, but really they're there mostly for the team up abilities. Instead of supers, you get team up abilities, and unlike Rival Schools, you don't get 9 meters of level where you're just spamming it over and over. Here, you don't get anywhere near as many levels, but they're also a lot more impactful. The team up moves are actually really cool. There's some unique ones here. They add a bit more strategy to everything. There's some new abilities you can do, and they're just really fun to watch. Some of them are kooky as hell and just go all over the place, and I'm just like, man, I don't know who came up with some of these attacks, but grade A stuff. It's as cheesy as it gets. And overall, it leads to this game just being rather enjoyable. Like, I've always had fun with this game, and I had fun with it even all these years later. There's not many other fighters like it, and the prospect of this finally going online is certainly there. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this one. Sure, it doesn't have some of the bonuses that the console versions had, but I'm just glad that the game has been re-released in some capacity. A super underrated title for sure. So here's one of the games that really made me raise an eyebrow when I saw this collection, and that is Power Stone. I love Power Stone 1 and 2, and even though they were re-released on the PSP, they desperately needed some kind of modern re-release, and Yeah, it's finally here. You can finally play the original Power Stone on a modern console, and it's glorious. Now, if you've never played Power Stone, this is a very different type of fighter from really anything else Capcom has ever made. It was actually a bit innovative for the time as well. It drops you into this big 3D arena, and you're told to just beat the snot out of the other person. How you do this, that's really up to you. There's a few basic combos, like really basic combos you can do in this game, but you can just freely walk around these environments, and you can interact with them quite a bit as well. There'll be tables and chairs all over the place. You can pick these up and throw them. Chests will show up that'll contain weapons you can pick up and use against each other, stuff like a flamethrower, a rocket launcher, guns, swords, a bunch of cool stuff. And then of course the power stones show up on these maps as well. If you're able to collect 3 of them, you basically become invincible, where you can use a bunch of ultimate moves to try to end your opponent's life even faster. And while this game doesn't have a ton of depth or complexity or nuance, and there's not a ton of combos and strings or anything of the sort, I'll tell you what it is: fun. It is just good old chaotic, messy fun. When you're going up against a buddy and the two of you are just scrambling to get these not Chaos Emeralds as fast as possible, or to grab one of those big weapons to beat the crap out of each other even further, it's just always such a good time. And along the way, you're just throwing hella shit at each other. Like, yeah, there's about as much depth as a locker room, but all these years later, Power Stone is still such a great time. There's been a few clones throughout the years. I remember that Billy and Mandy game really just tried to be Power Stone, but nothing can really replicate the original Power Stone. On top of this, it's got a pretty neat soundtrack. I love this game's aesthetic. The characters are cool. There was even an anime about them, and the world is somewhat interesting. Yeah, Power Stone is an absolute blast all these years later. Even though it's just one-on-one, I think the game is still immensely enjoyable, and it really does provide something different from the second game. With it being a maximum of 2 players, the chaos can be a bit controlled, unlike the second game. Speaking of the second game, here we have one of my absolute favorites, Power Stone 2. Power Stone 2 looks at the original Power Stone and they just say, we're gonna jack this up to 11 and make it as crazy as possible. And now it's available on a modern console. It doesn't really get much better than that. You can even play online now, and I'm sure that's gonna be a ton of fun as well. So Power Stone 2, it does play pretty similar to the first one. There isn't a lot of depth, there isn't a lot of complexity, there's more characters, and they try to make the characters a bit more different from each other, but there's no extensive strings or combos or anything like that. You're dropped into these bigger arenas now with 3 other people and are basically told to just have at it, and it's absolute mayhem. All of you attacking each other, going nuts on these maps, and then the maps themselves just go crazy as well, where they're constantly mixing things up, they're moving around, they're changing, they're evolving in the middle of this match. It is pure pandemonium. And sure, at times it's kind of hard to see what's happening, what's going on, where you are, or what even is happening during these matches, but I just love how chaotic Power Stone 2 gets. I love just how messy everything gets as you're beating the crap out of everybody with these giant weapons. You've got the stones. The maps themselves really are as chaotic as it gets, and yeah, it's just insanity that really never gets old. No 2 matches are going to be the same, and even though it is a little weird, you always have to have 4 people. This is one of those games that I feel like I could just never really get sick of. And if you're playing with a buddy, you can actually play through the arcade mode together, where you get to make a few basic choices and even fight some bosses. This is always going to be a good time as well. Power Stone 2 is just one of those quintessential party games from the early 2000s, kind of like Mario Party. You can break it out at pretty much any party. It doesn't really matter how many people are over. Y'all are just gonna have a great time. Get the boys together, get some pizza. I've broken Power Stone 2 out at a few different parties. I hope in the future I can break it out at more parties now that it's widely available. There's just nothing else really like it, not even the first one. And while it's certainly not everybody's cup of tea, I think most people are going to enjoy just how crazy this gets. And that's why I'm just genuinely so happy that this game has been re-released on a modern console. Like, this was maybe the game I wanted the most of any of these in this collection to be re-released. While I don't think it's the absolute best game of the collection, it very well might be my favorite. It is just always such a good time. It's fun, pure and simple. And so here we have maybe the most interesting game of the entire collection. We have Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper. And so you might be going, what's so special about that? It's just Street Fighter Alpha 3. That was even in the Street Fighter collection a few years ago. Why is it even on here? Well, this is the Upper version. Upper is a bit unique. It's actually the last version that was ever released for Street Fighter Alpha 3, and it does change a number of things. It does add a few extra characters, but it also reworks how one of the isms works, the V-ism, on top of bug fixing and balancing in general. And all of this really just makes Street Fighter Alpha 3 even better than ever. This seems to be like the best way to play Street Fighter Alpha 3 and hopefully how everyone's going to play it going forward. I know that when it comes to like the pro scene, there's always been a bit of a debate on which version to use. Well, hopefully going forward everybody can actually stick to this version, and after playing with it for a little bit, yeah, it's Street Fighter Alpha 3, which was a kick-ass, incredible fighting game that really has just gotten even better. This is unironically, genuinely one of the best Street Fighter games of them all. It's the best of the Street Fighter Alpha series. It's maybe the best Street Fighter game of the 90s. It's up there with Third Strike, and it's still one of the most playable games in the entire series. Yeah, it does feel a little stiff. It'll take some time to get used to. It's not super casual friendly, but man, there is a whole lot of depth here. The isms, which are essentially variants for the characters, are actually really cool and make it so all the characters have different movesets, different inputs, and it's like there's even more characters here. But the roster is actually pretty good in its own right. Pretty much all of the fan favorites are here. There's a few new characters, and I think it's one of the best rosters Street Fighter has ever had. All these years later, yeah, I'm still going to praise Street Fighter Alpha 3 quite a bit. I think the game is still excellent, and I think this is a neat little addition to the collection. This is also the first time the arcade version of Upper has ever been released in English, so that's pretty cool. Look, with a Capcom fighting collection, they gotta have at least one traditional game on there. They gotta have at least one Street Fighter game. I'm glad they chose something cool like this instead of like another version of Street Fighter 2. And I think this whole Upper thing is pretty rad. And then here we have the real star of the show, Capcom vs SNK2. I mean, it's on the cover of the game for a reason. They knew this was the big title. This is the center point of this entire collection. They know all the hype is behind this one. Now, Capcom vs SNK2 has actually never been re-released once. The game is 20 plus years old and has been dying, absolutely dying for some kind of modern re-release. Well, I'm so glad that it's absolutely here because this game is actually pretty great. And I would say that this game really lives up to the potential of Capcom vs SNK. They look at that original game, they see where things worked, where things didn't work, and just improve it in every conceivable way. To keep things shrimple here, we'll start with the presentation. It doesn't really look that different from the first one, but it looks a little bit better. Something though that I think is really great is the music. The music goes so hard in this game. I love the soundtrack to this game. I like the aesthetic. I like that the characters outside of Morgan are all one unified, cohesive art style. There's some really great sprites here. The animation's solid. It's a good looking game. Now, an issue I had with the first game that has absolutely been addressed here is the character roster. There are 48 characters in this game, and I think it's just a much stronger roster than what the first game had. Sure, a lot of it is Street Fighter and King of Fighters, but there actually is some other characters thrown in there, and there are a few deeper cuts. Could they have gone even deeper? Could they have included some wild characters? Sure, but I think the roster is actually really solid here. I can appreciate the variety. Now, when it comes to the actual moment-to-moment fighting, what you're here for, what you're doing 99% of the time, yeah, it's a big improvement on the first game. It feels like the first game in many aspects, but they've just had a lot of little tweaks here and there to really create genuinely one of the very best fighting game experiences ever. It's now a 6-button fighter, and it feels more like a Capcom fighting game than an SNK one, that's for sure. It's not as stiff, it doesn't require the most precise, crazy movements, and even though there still are plenty of loony inputs, it doesn't get as wild as the first games. It feels a little bit more casual in this sense, but it also just makes for a smoother, more refined experience. It's a nice balance between being a little more casual but also still catering to that hardcore audience. The ratio system returns here, and it's just so much better than what the first game had. If you're playing in single player, the game does not automatically assign ratios to characters. No, you get to just freely customize your character's power, their ratio. You can only have up to 3 characters now, but if you want a team of 3, try that. If you want to just have one strong as fuck boy, go ahead with that. Or if you want a nice balance, that's very doable as well. The game absolutely lets you just customize your ratio levels any way you want, and that's absolutely the way it should be, and I think it's just a lot more balanced overall. In the first one, a ratio 4 versus ratio 1, yeah, the one just had like no chance. Here, it actually feels like the ratios are a bit more balanced. Key phrase being, it feels more balanced, of course. That's not the only big change. Instead of there being 2 grooves, there's now 4 grooves, and all of these are actually different from each other. Some focusing more on the SNK side of things, some focusing on the Capcom side of things. I always stick to the Capcom side of things. I've always preferred Capcom games to SNK games, but I've always thought it's really cool just how many different grooves are here. There's a lot of customization here, more so than you would ever expect from a fighting game like this. and it can lead to just about every match feeling different. In the same way that I love Marvel vs. Capcom, I love Capcom vs. SNK too. There's so much variety, all the crazy combinations, the grooves, the ratios, it all just makes me come back to this game time after time again. It's easily the best crossover SNK's had with like anything, and I think this game puts SNK and its characters in a really great light. It really is a legendary fighting game for a reason. Like all these years later, it's still beloved, it's still played competitively. It was really just a great time. This game was actually like the first fighting game to ever have crossplay, which is just crazy, but now it can be played online again and it's better than ever. It's easily the best game of this entire collection, and if you're getting this collection, you're probably getting it for this game because it's really enjoyable and I think it's a hell of a lot of fun. Alright, that's it for today's video. Thank you again to Capcom for hooking me up with the collection. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe, y'all, and spicy nug. If you know, you know.